Hey guys, welcome to my cozy productive writing vlog where I'm not actually getting much work done today. I know, right? So I've been working on the beta reader feedback. If you know from previous episodes that I'd gotten feedback from several beta readers and I was going through it and just going through all their suggestions, many of which were really good and really valid and just things I hadn't thought about. I mean, that's what you need beta readers for, is to go through that stuff, because eventually, at least for me, eventually as I'm writing, my brain kind of skips over things, I guess is the best way to say. You know, like when you're reading a sentence and there's a word missing, but you read it just fine because your brain puts in the word that's missing and you don't even notice that anything's wrong. It's kind of how it feels like when I'm writing this late in the game, that there may be things wrong, but my brain already knows what should be there and is just putting in that missing information, especially things with like plot and backstories. Like, I know they're there and that I'm coming from this rich background, but I might not be laying it out explicitly enough for the reader. I've been working on it. The first thing I did was I set up the locales for chapter 1 and chapter 2, just giving the reader a very good concrete standing about where these two locations are set up. That was fairly easy. I just wrote 2 paragraphs, everything's good. But then the next thing I'm just working on is just chapter 1. When you first start out writing, everybody always tells you the hardest part about writing a book is chapter 1, is the beginning. And when I first started out, I don't know, many years ago, I guess, I always assumed that meant that just starting is the hardest part about writing. And I suppose there's probably a really good argument to be made that just sitting down to start writing a novel is actually the hardest part about writing, is just doing it. But where I'm at this point is just so many things have to happen in chapter 1. There's character motivation to be set up. Like I said, there was location to be set up. There's sub-characters and subplots. There's so many points, and they need to hit just the right point. They need to hit just the right tone and execution. Like, they need to be laid out in just the right way, with just the right amount of exposition, without it feeling like I'm throwing an encyclopedia at the reader. That chapter 1 is just, it's really difficult to write. Especially now, I've reworked it so many times, and now I'm doing it one more time. And I'm sure I'm going to do it again after this goes to my editor and that comes back and we start working on it again. We're just going to be reworking chapter 1 over and over and over and over and over and over again. It feels like it's never ending, and it's constantly evolving. And some of the strange part is that chapter 1 sets up the tone for the whole story, right? Like chapter 1 tells you what the story is going to be like. And sometimes adding these little pieces just alters the tone in a little way. It kind of reminds me of that, the pebble in a lake, like the little ripples that go out and they change everything, but they get bigger and bigger and bigger. That's kind of how I feel like tone changes in chapter 1, how they affect the rest of the novel, because a little tone change in chapter 1 reverberates through the rest of the story, and it does make some things where you need to change in other chapters, but also it influences how the reader is feeling and thinking about things. So their idea of what the story is going to change from one read to the other if chapter 1 changes. That's not bad. There's no way that's bad, but as the writer, it feels like there's constantly these little shifts that I need to be aware of and then keep track of, because I need to make some changes through the other chapters to accommodate these little shifts. And it makes me worried that I'm going to miss 1 or 2 or a dozen. And then I'll come back with another situation like this where just some things don't match up. Like, for example, one of the things that doesn't match up because of a lot of edits and rewrites is the idea of Maggie. Now, if you're familiar at all with my channel, you might know that Maggie is the dead mother of my main character. And she is throughout the novel in italicized text. Basically, what she's doing is she's talking to the main character kind of in the back of her mind. Now, in the beginning, Maggie was just a memory. She was kind of a figment of the main character's imagination, but her way of coping with things. That her mother died and she's left in this really dangerous, tense environment. So that was just her mental way of coping with things. But then it changed that Maggie is actually a ghost. And that's where we are in this iteration. Maggie is a ghost, but what needs to happen is it needs to be a gentle ride from chapter 1 all the way to chapter 29 with the reader figuring out that Maggie is a ghost, because I don't want to come out and explicitly say that, because then it's influencing the reader in the wrong direction. And there's actually one point where my other main character, my other point of view character, is seeing Kate, my main character, talk with Maggie. And it's just kind of like how you see someone talking to themselves. Like, they're saying one thing and then they're saying something very angrily to a person that you can't see. So that was kind of enforcing the idea that maybe Maggie was all just in Kate's head. So I always wanted that progression to be there, but the reason I'm talking about it now is because that was a victim of cuts and rewrites. And I was actually confusing my readers, because I had at one point her mother's ghost said, and then at another point I had like the memory of her mother's ghost whispered. And those taken together they were making the reader confused about what Maggie was. And they wasn't confused in a good way. It wasn't the confusion that I wanted. So I have to go back through in chapter 1 and pay attention to all the Maggie identifiers, making sure that they're all matching up and that the progression is going. And that's the kind of thing I'm just talking about, that I might be missing things in the rest of the novel, things like that I just forget to check because it's all in my head. That's kind of where I'm at with chapter 1. I'm working with a lot of the beta readers' feedback. Like I need to do, why is Henry in chapter 1? What is his motivation? Why is he doing what he's doing so the rest of what he does in other chapters makes sense? I need to put in things about Maggie and Henry's relationship, because I feel like if I don't do it in chapter 1, by the time I start laying other breadcrumbs in other chapters, the reader just doesn't care anymore, because I've already thrown the plot at them, and that's what they're paying attention to. And it's important to start laying out the small town politics part and the history of all the older adults and how they all fit together in these early chapters before I lose the reader on other points of the plot where it no longer fits, like it would just feel weird to throw it in, or that the reader is focused on something else and they're going to miss those parts. Something else I need to take care of is also her grandmother's motivation. My main character's grandmother is kind of like the invisible antagonist in this whole story. There is other like monster antagonists going on, like there's monsters that are like trying to kill them and stuff, so there is that, but kind of like the mental background antagonist. One of my beta readers came back and said that they know that her grandmother is supposed to be that role, but they just didn't care about her. Like I didn't make it a big enough thing to make the reader care about it. So again, that's something else I need to take care of in chapter 1. And there's so many things that need to be fixed in chapter 1, so many things that need to be set up and like massaged gently into place so the reader doesn't feel like I'm setting all this stuff out. Like, it needs to be natural. And I think that's what makes chapter 1 so goddamn hard to write. And I haven't even gotten past chapter 1. Like I'm having a really hard day writing this stuff because I just feel like I keep going over, and then I start writing myself down this other road. I'm like, wait a second, where are you going? And I have to rein myself back in. It's like I'm going overboard sometimes in the backstory situation, and then I have to rein it back in and delete 2 paragraphs because suddenly I'm talking about stuff that happened in the 90s with Maggie, and I just got done talking about a book review where they did that and I hated it, so clearly I can't do that myself. So that's where I am. A year of writing and I'm back stuck on chapter 1, trying to make it work in a good way. I don't think it could work in a bad way, because then it, by definition, wouldn't work. Okay. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.